Hey, what's up guys? My name is Cherno. Welcome back to my game engine series. So last time we did some pretty exciting stuff with gizmos. We added gizmos to the engine. Enough said. Check out that video if you haven't already. And today we're going to be continuing on with the fun jamming in features without even looking back stuff, and we're going to be adding in finally an editor camera. So what this is all about is at the moment when we render our scene, even in the editor, we actually have to have a camera entity. If we don't have an entity in the scene that is a camera or that has a camera component on it, then we just won't even see anything. And furthermore, we even had some other issues where if you try and select an object and try and manipulate it using a gizmo, it will crash because there's no active camera, and the camera needs to be there so we can even see the gizmo and interact with it and all that stuff. So numerous problems, but ultimately it just comes down to the fact that we just didn't have time to jam in an editor camera. It's a very important concept because obviously, and also it just becomes even more important when you think about the distinction between the actual editor and then the actual runtime, right? Because just like in any engine, we have like a play button, we have a way to actually play our scene. That's when we want to be using the actual camera entity. But then when we're constructing our scene, of course, we want to have our own camera that has nothing to do with the game so that we can just observe the world and manipulate it and form it and do whatever we want with it. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Now, a few notes before we move on with that. First of all, Hazel has no concept of runtime, but this is kind of, oh, thank you, Middream LA, for subscribing. Welcome. Appreciate the support. Oh, we just got a little raid. That's what happened. I was like, what's going on with all the emojis? Anyway, that's fun. Hey, I watch your videos like every night. Awesome, Middream. Thank you. Thank you for raiding. And anyway, I'm in the middle of recording a YouTube video, so let's get on with that. Yeah, so where was I? So yeah, so the biggest problem with Hazel right now is we have no distinction between runtime and editor, but this is kind of where we begin almost creating the distinction. So this is like one of those historic moments that you mark. Not really, but basically, as of today, we're going to actually split up our rendering functions inside our scene class into like a render editor and a render runtime. And the render editor will ultimately use the editor camera that we're going to add, and then render runtime is going to use the runtime entity. If it exists. If it doesn't, we'll see a black screen ultimately. So we're not going to like add the play button or anything today, but it is going in that direction, which is pretty exciting because we're really seeing a lot of I guess growth, you could say, and progress in Hazel. So how are we going to do this editor camera? Now, the other thing, and this is the other important thing that I wanted to mention. We at the moment, our priority is of course the 2D workflow. However, even in a 2D game, it's obviously quite useful to be able to like orbit around and see our 2D scene in 3D, just because it might help with picking certain objects and just moving around. Excuse me, and moving around and doing all of that stuff. And if you just have like a 2D camera that's just tied to the two axes, it might be difficult. So we are actually going to be adding a 3D camera, which is pretty exciting. Now, it's very easy to lock the rotation if you don't want it to rotate, and if you really do want the camera to just be like in 2D. We're not going to be talking about orthographic projection for editor camera here today, but as a perspective camera locking, I'll show you guys how to do that as well. And without further ado, let's dive in and take a look. So ultimately speaking, I've basically spent the whole morning live streaming, and I figured out how to do all this camera stuff. I'm going to be using my camera class from like 5 years ago. I mean, over the last 5 years, I've developed this camera class and I've been adding stuff to it, and I cleaned it up this morning on stream as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in, and then I'll walk you guys through it. It's pretty simple. It's mostly just a bunch of maths that you can probably study yourselves, but it'll be part of Hazel from now on, which is pretty cool. And feel free to obviously use it for whatever you guys want to use it for. And there was one other thing that I wanted to mention. Oh yeah. And we did some pretty fun stuff this morning on stream. I streamed this, by the way. Well, you probably saw with the whole rating thing. Twitch.tv/thecherno is where I live stream. Thank you guys a lot for your support. There's been a lot of people like subscribing to me on stream and all of that stuff, which is amazing. And that really obviously helps me you know, deliver more and more content to you guys, which is amazing. But also, like, we did some pretty fun stuff on stream. This is what we did this morning. So this is also, in a way, a good way to show you guys where Hazel is heading. This is Hazeldev. This is the patreon.com/thecherno version of Hazel that you guys can get access to if you pledge and support me on Patreon. So this is what Hazeldev looks like. Hazeldev is exactly where Hazel is going to. So this game engine series, this is where we're going, right? This is just my version that I've basically, you know, gone and done my homework early in a way. And like, you know, I've just done this on my own time just to see where we're going and how to implement certain features, because of course it's getting harder and harder for me to just write code off the top of my head without spending hours like fixing it and working out what the best way is to do stuff and experimenting and all of that stuff. So this is ultimately where we're heading. Looks pretty cool. We've got some like like a dancing stormtrooper, and I'll probably show more of this in like a devlog a bit later on. But I thought it might be nice to show you guys basically what the deal is with Hazeldev and everything that's going on with that. So this is the kind of stuff that we work on during the live stream. So if you're interested in that, definitely go ahead and follow on twitch.tv/thecherno. And also if you want access to the whole backlog of previous live streams because you just can't get enough of Hazel content and you want to learn more and you want to see more, then on Patreon as well, there's like a huge backlog of all the live streams I've basically ever done. So definitely take a look at that. Okay, without further ado, let's dive in and take a look at how we can actually get this editor camera here. Now it's already here, and that's because I forgot to revert all of the stuff that I did on stream to test and to work out how to do everything. So let me quickly, that's awkward. Let me quickly, I guess, revert everything. And this will take us back to, so this should be gone now. This will take us back to the previous commit that we're at, which is on GitHub. Having some coffee, it's been a long day. Oh no, I did something terrible with YAML. Okay, it's all right, no worries, just reverted the project file. So it got deleted because it's not committed. I just reran pre-make and we are good to go. This is where we left off last time. Okay, so we had this pink cube. This is what it looks like. And we, of course, added gizmos so that we can use them and actually manipulate everything just using these on-screen gizmos instead of relying on this transform component UI over here. All of that is fantastic and great, but what about moving this? What about just being able to like alt, you know, click and, you know, whatever to orbit the camera around and actually zoom in and out and pan around and actually see everything working? What about all of that stuff? How do I do that stuff? How are we even seeing this, first of all, and how is the picking stuff working? Well, I'm sorry, not the picking, but the gizmos. So we have a camera at the moment. If we don't have a camera, guess what? We don't see anything. We have these entities, in fact, and we get other crashes. I think this is because of this. We'll be fixing this as well today. It's because of the gizmo, because the gizmo expects there to be a camera. There's not a camera. That's okay. It's just because we had an active gizmo. If we make sure we don't have an active gizmo and I delete this camera, that's it. You know, we have these entities. They exist in the scene, but where are they? There's no camera to actually render them. We have to add a camera, which seems a bit ridiculous because, well, you know, let's add a perspective camera like we did last time. Let's, you know, pull it back or whatever. And of course we can get back to basically, you know, where we used to be. But the problem is that that's not how we want to do things. So we don't want to be moving some kind of camera here, which actually is an entity in and of itself. We want to be able to use an editor camera. I don't think I need to convince you guys that that's an important thing, but just in case you're new to this and you might be like, well, why can't we just use this camera? Because we want to basically observe the world through the lens of like our editor and, you know, as a tool, not necessarily as a runtime game, because that's a separate thing than an editor by itself, okay? So how do we set that up? Well, again, what that means is that we need to take a look at how we render things in the first place. So if we go over here into our scene class, we don't have a scene renderer class. I'll probably make that in the future. Basically, I'm not going to talk about that now actually because this episode's already dragging on. But for now, everything happens inside onUpdate. We update our scripts, we have our render 2D scene thing, and you can see that what we do here is we basically look for a camera. So we look for a camera component, an entity in our scene that has a camera component, and we check to make sure that it's the primary camera. And then if we find it, then we have something to render. So we begin scene and we render everything. That's great for the runtime. For the editor, that's not what we want to do at all. Now, just to also put this into perspective, there's no way that we want to update scripts and actually run our script runtime. I mean, this is just like a native script thing. It's just C++ code. It's not C# yet. But when we do have C# scripts, we don't want to run them during the editor, right? Like when we're just observing everything through the editor. We may want to execute certain scripts just to see their effect, but that's something else entirely. Usually we don't want to be running our entities on update functions during the actual just editor life, right? It's when we hit play that we want to start doing that kind of stuff. So because of that, this doesn't even need to exist anyway for the editor, right? This was just here because we needed a way to see our scripts running, and we don't have runtime, so we just jam them into the editor. So all of this is wrong, basically. What this is leading towards is basically me making something called onUpdateRuntime. This is the runtime update function, ultimately, and it always was. It just wasn't called that. So let's rename this to onUpdateRuntime. Then I'm going to add another function called onUpdateEditor. Two code parts. Some of them are going to be similar. We will consolidate a lot of them later, but you can also imagine that updating the editor and updating the runtime, two very different things. In fact, we might even want to split up the scene class to be like editor scene or like a scene renderer for the editor or something like that, because obviously the editor and the game are two very different things. But for now, we won't go too crazy. We'll just add another function. We'll call this one during editor, this one during runtime, right? Pretty easy. But ultimately, if you think about it, they really are two different code paths, right? Like for example, in the editor, we might want things like gizmos, like we might want like a grid rendering. We might want, outlines on the selected entity. None of that needs to exist inside the runtime, right? We just render our meshes. So it's very different, basically, is my point, between the editor and the runtime. So one thing we'll add here as well that we need is something called an editor camera. That's basically what we'll be adding today, because the scene won't contain an editor camera, but we're going to need some kind of editor camera to be able to render the scene through the editor's point of view. So we'll add that here. Now, what do we need from this function? Well, we don't need to look for the camera. We don't need to update the scripts. What we need is just this, basically. So it's actually really simple. We just need to do that. Now, begin scene also doesn't take in an editor camera. We have this orthographic camera thing that's marked kind of for removal. We basically need a version of this that uses the editor camera. So I'll copy and paste this, and we'll take in an editor camera. Now, I'm doing a lot of stuff here with this editor camera that doesn't exist yet. Let's just jam it in, and we'll see what that looks like. So inside Hazel Renderer, I will add editor camera.h. It already exists. I thought I deleted it. I guess it didn't revert properly. Yeah, it's here. Great, I'll just include it. Yay, that's easy. It's even here. That's because Premake picked it up. Okay, so this is the editor camera class. Surprise! It just appeared out of nowhere. So basically, let's walk through this class. So this is a class, as I mentioned, that I've had for like literally 5 years. I remember when I started Sparky, which was probably in the beginning of 2015, so almost 6 years, that's when I initially sat down and wrote like a Maya camera style class. So this is what it is, right? So basically, to be mostly brief, because I think that if you guys read the code, you'll probably understand it. I tried to clean it up and write it in a simple way. Basically, to use this camera, all you need, and it actually extends, well, it's actually a subclass of Hazel's camera, which has a projection matrix. So all this does is it basically controls like the view matrix, right? So if you look at the update function, if we hold down Alt, that's like so this is based on like the Maya camera, I guess. So if you hold down Alt and then the middle mouse button, it pans. So Alt middle mouse drag is pan. Alt left mouse button drag is rotate. Or orbit, and then Alt right mouse button drag is zoom. You can also use a scroll wheel to zoom as well. So you can kind of read through here and see what it does. It calculates the delta between how much the mouse has moved. Now, there are a lot of little magic numbers everywhere. That's because over time, this, by the way, I've been asked about this before. I went onto like a graphing website and I just plotted a graph and I worked out just exactly what I wanted it to be like, and then I copied the function for the graph. So you can see that this is actually a quadratic function. So we have like, x squared minus x plus, whatever the constant is, right? So that's how these numbers came about. They're not just random. I actually graphed it and I actually spent a long time on this. probably a couple of years ago or a year ago, just tweaking it just so that it feels good, because you can see that the pan speed is dependent on how big our viewport is. And you know, there's some other things. Feel free to change it. This is just my little buttery smooth kind of camera class that I like using, which is obviously built on Magic. So that's how it works. On mouse scroll does a mouse zoom. We have mouse pan, mouse rotate. Again, this stuff is fairly, I guess, simple. We have like the idea of a focal point. We have yaw pitch for our cameras. We can't tilt the camera, but we have a yaw and a pitch. So we have like a yaw, which is like our Y kind of axis rotation, and pitch, which is our X axis rotation. We have a distance that gets changed based on when we zoom or not. So obviously zooming actually moves the camera. And then we just have all of these kind of directional vectors based on our orientation so that we can apply the right pan and stuff like that. So read through it. It's mostly just a mathematical thing, I guess. And without doing a bunch of diagrams and drawing everything, it's going to be difficult to explain with words. But I think that it should be fairly simple. You don't really, it does use a little bit of quaternions, but mostly it's okay. The quaternions are just really used for, I think, eventually calculating the view matrix, which happens over here. We just use translate, and then you can see that we get like a rotation matrix from that quaternion over here. Now, I added this little comment in during the live stream as well. That's to lock the camera's rotation, and we'll play around with both sides of that as well. Yes, stream, I am recording. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So that's basically the edited camera, right? So if we go back into Renderer 2D, how do we render with it? Well, there are some convenience functions inside there, such as get view matrix, which is really all we need. So begin scene, let's make a version of that takes in the edited camera. So let's copy everything. So what do we need? We need the view projection. Well, luckily edited camera has a function called get view projection. Literally all we need to do. Right, that just gets the view projection, and then we pass it in, and that's it. That is how we begin a scene with a different view projection matrix done, right? And in scene, again, we just take in camera. That's it. So it's really simple, nothing much changes. We're just, essentially at the end of the day, we're just sending a different view matrix to our shader, right? So if we look at our shader, that we're rendering with, which I think is called like texture or something. Shaders, texture. We have a view projection matrix. That's the thing that's changing. That's it. We're just sending a different view projection matrix because we're rendering through the point of view of our camera, our editor camera, rather than like some runtime camera. That's the only difference. This matrix is different. And then we just have to trace everything back and obviously add some, you know, controls, I guess, to editor camera, which we do through both events and also the update function. So really what we have to do is create an editor camera now inside the editor layer, and then call on update every frame, and then call on event when an event occurs. And then if it's like a mouse scroll event, then we need to deal with that. Actually, one more thing that we do need to do that's really important is the set viewport size function. So we need to set this function, because if we don't, then the aspect ratio of the perspective projection is not going to be correct. So you need to set this whenever the viewport changes. And in fact, you should set it initially as well. You can provide an initial aspect ratio, but because that's probably at a point before we've laid out our panels and we see how big our viewport is, it's probably going to be redundant. Like, it's probably not redundant, but it's probably going to be wrong. So we need to actually provide our own, we need to actually set the viewport size once we know the viewport size. So how do we do this in editor layer? Pretty simple. Let's just create a camera. So I'll just do it here. Editor camera, editor camera, editor camera. Let me just include that as well. So include Hazel renderer editor camera.h. It has a default constructor, but we want to create a slightly different one. The reason is that when we first created our camera with the camera controller, I think, or rather, sorry, that doesn't matter anymore, the camera controller, we should probably get rid of that. When we first created the camera inside, I think our, I mean, it's not going to show up here, but if I can't really run this now, can I? Let's go on update runtime for now. Let's just run this, see if everything works still. Nope. So scene.h is not happy, I think because we didn't include it. We may have included it in the CBP file. No, we didn't. Okay, include that. Include Hazel stuff first. We'll do runtime and then editor, like that. Just because runtime, you could say, is more important. Try build that again. Drinking the coffee is making me thirsty, so I'm drinking the water. It's a vicious cycle. All right, we see everything, right? If we look at the camera, field of view is 30. So we actually wanted a slightly lower, I guess, field of view. If we make it 45, it looks a bit more distorted, obviously, and the more it goes, the more it goes. So let's go ahead and set up a 30-degree field of view so that it looks about the same, at least for this scene. So edit a camera, if we wanted to do that, we can always change it later. 30 field of view. Again, the aspect ratio, like, who cares, because we're going to resize it. So I'll just set it to 16:9. It doesn't matter. We'll just do 1.78 or whatever. Near clip 0.1, far clip 1000. Pretty reasonable values. And then we need to do everything to our editor camera that needs to be done. So we need to update it. So we'll do editor camera dot on update. Do we need to do this if the viewport is focused? I guess so, right? I mean, what does this do? It just does, yeah, okay. So we'll do that here. Again, I'm not sure what's going on with the camera control. I don't think we need this anymore, but we'll deal with that later. Might have a maintenance episode when we actually look at that, because I don't want to get distracted by a billion other things and confuse you guys. So that's that, right? We'll do on update editor now, right? So this should take in our editor camera. When we do our viewport rendering, that's when we actually check to see if the viewport size has changed. And that happens, where does that happen? Viewport size being, I think it happens here actually. No, that's docking enable, and where is the whole viewport size? Viewport panel size. Huh. I can't believe I lost this. There's definitely a place where we check to make sure the viewport size has changed. Well, we check to see if the viewport size has changed. And if it has, it's up here. It's in on update. Okay, maybe, I'm not sure if it should be here. But anyway, we do camera controller on resize. So we do editor camera set viewport. And then this again gets set to these two floats, viewport size X and Y. And then finally, the on event function needs to get called as well. So we do that by doing editor camera on event. That is it. And just like that, just like magic, we should now be able to have a viewport camera. Everything's very magical in these episodes because I do all the hard work on stream. So if we create a new empty entity, starting with a new scene here, right? I'm gonna go ahead and add a Sprite Renderer component to it. Okay, we don't see anything. Bad news bears, I know exactly why. Well, I don't know exactly why. Actually, I thought I knew why, but I guess not. So on update editor should be beginning scene with that, and we should have a view projection matrix. So actually that should have probably showed up because I think that by default we should have pulled the camera back a little bit and set it to -10, which we did. Oh, that's a bit odd. We should be okay. We should have seen something. Oh, I can kind of see it. Looks weird. I see dots. Okay, something's clearly wrong. I wonder what we did wrong. So after some stream debugging, we had our distance set inside the position, whereas we should have set it here because position gets recalculated. So everything was working. It was just in the wrong spot, and it's obviously difficult. If you have a camera that's like, you know, somewhere in like an incorrect spot like this, it's hard sometimes to find your geometry because you have no idea where it is. So instead of, you know, because it's still, everything was here. It's just that it was, we have to actually zoom out, I think, quite a bit to get to this state. And then we have everything. So instead of doing that, let's set the distance to 10 so that we're kind of away. We're kind of focusing on the origin of the scene, but then we bring the camera back so that we are 10 units away from the focal distance. And that way you can see that we can see everything immediately, which is great. So we've added an empty entity. It's this, and now we can do everything. So I'm using my mouse scroll wheel here, my mouse wheel, to zoom in and out. If I hold down Alt and the middle mouse button, I can pan, as you can see. Alt and left mouse button is to orbit around, and Alt right mouse button is same as scroll wheel, just to scroll. And just like in like a 3D program, I guess, if you start getting closer and closer, it'll actually slow slower and slower, because you have the concept of a focal point, and you can't go beyond the focal point. You can make the focal point jump forward every time you cross it. That's super annoying in my experience. So if you actually want to move it around, in the future there will be like an F to focus button so that you can focus, but you can always just kind of pan on the side like that. Usually if you want to move your focal point, to kind of move it this way so that you can get closer to something. That's just a standard kind of 3D thing with 3D programs usually, and that's just how the cameras usually work. All right, let's try and open our pink cube scene. Our camera won't move, by the way, it'll stay in the same place. There's our pink cube scene. Now, as you can see there, it's a lie. Now we can actually see that because we can orbit around, but ultimately, yeah, not great. Now, what's gonna happen if I try and manipulate something with I'm Gizmo? Well, it's gonna look stupid. It's still gonna work, but it's gonna look really weird. Why? Because obviously it's rendering from the point of view of this camera. And additionally, if we didn't have that camera, so if I delete that, then if I try and manipulate something, it'll crash because now it can't find the camera. So we need to add that back in. How do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is find our I'm Gizmo code, which is over here. And then instead of doing this camera stuff, so I'll call this runtime camera, which we get from the entity. I'll kind of comment this stuff out because we will need it in the future, right? And then I'm just gonna add like a little editor camera. So this is going to basically be the same as that, so I'll copy that. Just the difference is this is going to come from editor camera, get projection. And then this camera view is going to be editor camera, get view matrix. Okay, that's it. And then I think everything else just remains the same. So let's hit F5, and hopefully now we'll be able to orbit around like usual, but we'll also be able to actually click on objects. Well, not click on objects, but select objects in the hierarchy and move them around. Okay, so let's grab this. Yeah, and you can see that obviously now the gizmos are all in the right place. We can move this, and you can see that we're really kind of beginning to get like a little bit of a 3D feel here, even though this is still technically 2D. Well, the thing is, it was always 3D. So when I say things like it was still technically 2D, I mean, our goals are still technically 2D, but this obviously is quite 3D because that's just the way OpenGL works. Everything is 3D. Let's maybe dim the lights a bit. And we kind of have a nice background now in 3D space, obviously. And you can see that it's probably quite easy to just keep adding stuff like this, maybe rotate it 90 degrees or something like that. Make it way bigger. Now we have like a little ground plane. And you can see that we're practically already like half of the way to this. So in no time, you know, in no time, you will see this inside Hazel. Okay. Anyway, that's going to wrap up the stream and the episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. Where is all my stuff? I actually have a Elgato Stream Deck now, so I can use that. It's fancy. But thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button. If you're watching on Twitch, don't forget to follow and maybe even subscribe if you're feeling generous. Don't forget that you can help support this series and everything that I'm doing with Hazel over at patreon.com/thecherno. Huge thank you to everyone who does help support me and everything like that. Astro, thank you so much for subscribing. There you go. I see people already taking the initiative. It's brilliant. I would not be here without your guys' support. So I really, truly do appreciate this because obviously working on Hazel as like a full-time thing is basically a dream job. So thank you guys so much. And if you do help support on Patreon, you'll get access to all of that Hazeldev code that I mentioned with that animation stuff and you know, all the 3D rendering, and basically you can probably make a little game there because it's got C# scripting and everything. So if you want to take a peek at where the Game Engine series is heading, definitely help support there, and you'll also get access to all the live streams, all the recorded live streams and stuff like that. But thank you guys for watching, and next time, I think it's probably a good idea to work on textures because we're seeing a lot of kind of flat colored stuff and that's great, but I want to be able to see textures. Maybe mouse picking is something that, you know, being able to click on an object and actually pick it in the scene, that would be useful. And we could definitely set that up. And also, oh, actually I forgot to show one thing. Sorry guys, abort mission, we are going back. we are going back. So what I wanted to show was the locking thing, right? So if you want to lock the camera because you really do want it to be 2D in a way, like the camera itself, I mean. So if you open this up, oops, I added a camera. Let's add a Sprite Renderer. If you just want it to be kind of, I already ruined it. I held a button that I shouldn't have held. So if we go to Sprite Renderer, if you just want it to be, see, this is annoying. This is what I mean by the Viewport Focus thing. This doesn't work until I click and then I can do it. So I don't want that to happen. Let's go to the whole Viewport Focus thing, because apparently middle mouse click doesn't focus the viewport. So let's go and quickly revert that. Or like not revert it, but just do that. And I'm not sure about the camera controller, that's just weird. Yeah, we're going back. Yeah, if I create an empty entity again, and this time it should work, yep. So if you just want this to exist, right, and you don't want this rotation, because it's kind of 2D, then all you have to do, and we might expose this later as like a check option thing or whatever, but basically all you have to do is set the yaw and pitch to just 0 before we update the view, right? That will just get rid of any rotation. It'll set everything to 0, and that way if you add this back in, then you just won't be able to. So I'm pressing Alt and left click here, nothing is happening, right? So everything will just be fixed to this. So you can keep it like that if you want. And obviously all the gizmos and everything will work. And you can rotate it because it is obviously still in 3D, but you just won't be able to move the camera past that. It's always going to be fixed kind of in like a 2D view, you could say, with basically no rotation. And no tilt either, because that's weird. But I guess you could add something for tilt if you really wanted to. So I will leave that unchecked, just because I think it might be cool for people to obviously explore all this stuff we've done today in like a 3D fashion. But ultimately, this is what it should look like if you actually open up the repository and take a look for yourself. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, as I said before, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.